Next to the pursuit of peace, the really greatest challenge to the human family is the race between food supply and population increase. That race tonight is being lost.
There was a moment when the future of food looked uncertain. The world's population was growing faster than it ever had before.
5 million Indians may die of hunger this year. By the end of the year, there'll be another 12 million mouths to feed.
For the first time in modern history, there was a real fear that humanity might be unable to feed itself.
You would not expect a famine situation in the spring.
You see, if we drift along, anything can happen.
What caused it? How was it averted? And is it really over? In the 1960s, this wasn't a fringe idea. It was a widely accepted possibility. One of the most influential voices at the time, Paul Ehrlich, warned that mass starvation was inevitable. Now, Ehrlich wasn't a food scientist or an agricultural economist. He was an entomologist, a man who spent his career studying butterflies. But in 1966, he and his wife Anne visited India, and what he saw there changed the direction of his life. Overcrowded streets, poverty, a country visibly straining under its own population. He came home and started writing, and the world he was writing into was already primed for bad news. You see, this was during the Cold War, a world that had grown under the shadow of nuclear war, a world that had learned to believe that civilization was one miscalculation away from collapse. Ehrlich's argument didn't feel radical in that context. It felt like the logical next disaster. His 1968 book, The Population Bomb, opened with a line that landed like a verdict. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. It sold over 2 million copies and was realized in magazines. Ehrlich appeared on American TV so many times that his face became synonymous with the warning itself.
This year, somewhere between 10 and 20 million people will starve to death on this planet. Last year, the same. The year before that, the same. Next year, almost certainly more and more and more.
And he wasn't alone. Experts, policymakers, scientists, many agreed.
Next to the pursuit of peace, the really greatest challenge to the human family is the race between food supply and population increase. That race tonight is being lost. Time for rhetoric has clearly passed. The time for concerted action is here, and we must get on with the job.
In countries like India, the situation was becoming critical.
Nearly 500 million human beings, 1/7 of the human race, today face the threat of the worst famine this century. 5 million Indians may die of hunger this year, and by the end of the year, there'll be another 12 million mouths to feed.
The monsoon had failed, not once, but twice. In 1965 and 1966, harvests were failing, droughts made things worse, and food reserves were dangerously low.
And of course you know that the situation has been complicated by the great drought we had this year. That was one of the reasons for the food shortage.
How serious is this food shortage going to be in the spring?
I think it's still difficult to give a definite answer, because if it rains, it should rain now in January. And if it rains, it does help a bit. But of course we are getting food from outside, and I think that might tide us over the really difficult period.
Food was being imported and consumed almost immediately upon arrival. At one point, the country was described as ship to mouth. There was no buffer, no margin for error. The question being asked in government corridors was no longer if a famine was coming, it was whether anything could slow it down. But while much of the world focused on the problem, someone, quietly, was working on a solution. His name was Norman Borlaug. He was a plant scientist. Since the late 1940s, he had been working in rural Mexico, crouching between wheat stalks, cross-pollinating by hand, in the kind of slow, unglamorous scientific labor that doesn't make headlines. For years, he had been experimenting with wheat, trying to create something different. The problem with high-yield wheat at the time was that it grew tall, and tall wheat, heavy with grain, fell over before harvest. The crop collapsed, the yield was lost. But Borlaug developed a new kind of wheat, a shorter, stronger, and semi-dwarf variety that stood firm under the weight of its own grain and produced 2, sometimes 3 times the yield of conventional varieties. When these crops were introduced, first in Mexico, then in India and Pakistan, Combined with other factors of the Green Revolution, such as development of chemical fertilizers and controlled irrigation, yields didn't just improve, they surged. Pakistan's wheat production nearly doubled within 2 years. Fields that once struggled began producing more food than ever before. Countries that had depended on imports started feeding themselves. India, once on the brink of famine, was self-sufficient by the 1970s. In 1970, Borlaug was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
I call upon you, Norman Ernest Borlaug, to come to the rostrum and receive the diploma and the gold medal of the Nobel Peace Prize for 1970.
It is true that the tide of battle against hunger has changed for the better during these past 3 years. But tides have a way of flowing and ebbing again. We may be at high tide now, but ebb tide could follow soon and set in if we become complacent and relax our efforts.
In the end, the world didn't run out of food, but not because the warnings were beasless, and not because the problem wasn't real. It didn't happen because something changed. Innovation moved faster than the crisis. But Borlaug understood what the celebrations missed. He had only bought the world time, because the Green Revolution ran on things that don't last forever. Fossil fuel-derived fertilizers, aquifers that take centuries to refuel and years to drain, vast fields of a single crop, extraordinarily efficient, yet very fragile. In 1970, the same year Borlaug won the Nobel, a single fungus wiped out approximately 15% of the entire US corn harvest. The famine Ehrlich predicted never came, but something else did. Today, the world produces enough food to feed every person on the planet, and yet 318 million people faced acute hunger in 2025. Two famines confirmed simultaneously for the first time this century in Gaza and Sudan. Food distribution currently faces major challenges. Conflict cutting off supply routes, climate change destroying crops before they reach the market, fertilizer prices spiking overnight because the raw materials come from war zones. The Green Revolution and its key players solved the question of production. The question of access, however, remains unanswered.